So magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Medyo na-challenge po dito sa lawak ah, ng saklaw ng PMPI. Parang I'm speaking to the whole country. Pero kahit na challenge ko, can you hear me? I'm muted. Okay, right, yeah. Stop share. Okay. Ang gagawin ko ngayon, I will try and share with you a story, the new story of creation. Tayong mga tao, isang katangian natin is we love stories. Oh, I feel I'm shouting. Yeah. Mahina ba? Sa ibang... Yeah. Okay. Okay, pero napaka-ingay dito, no? Yeah. Okay. So, ang hinihingi ko sa inyo na I invite you to listen to a story. Mula ng bata pa tayo, we love stories, you know, where the kid says to the parent, Mama, Papa, kwento pa. Pero hindi pangkaraniwang, hindi basta-basta yung story na ito. It's the biggest story that we can ever know. I'll start with 1988. Dito sa Pilipinas, kinalabas ng mga bishops, Conference of the Philippines, the first ever pastoral, 1988, so none of you were even born, no? The first ever pastoral letter on the environment and the social situation. Ang tawag ay, what is happening to our beautiful land? And in this, inilatag nila kung ano ang kalagayan ng Pilipinas, kung ano ang kalagayan ng ating daigdig, at kung gaanong matindi yung crisis, no? Unfortunately, it hasn't been listened to. Pero nilatag nila yan. Tapos, at the end, they outline what needs to be done. Pero one of the things they say is, ang problema ay ang pananaw ng tao. And they said, we need a new vision. And they said, we will not be successful in our efforts to develop a new attitude to the natural world unless we are sustained and nourished by a new vision. This new vision must blossom forth from our understanding of the world as God intended it to be. And then they say something very important. We can know the shape of this world by looking at how God originally fashioned our world and laid it out before us. So, ang gagamitin natin dito ay yung kaalaman natin bilang mga modern people about what we know about creation and what is the story of creation. Ang laman nito is more scientific. Pero sanay tayo sa mga stories of creation, like the story of creation in Genesis, no? But this is the new story of creation. Hindi kumakontra sa Genesis, pero parang dagdag na lang sa sinasabi ng Genesis, no? So, like all good creation stories, we start with in the beginning. And according to the scientific story, in the beginning, there was nothing. Pero before we go on to that, mga over 100 years ago, natuklasan ng mga scientists na our universe is expanding. And so if it's expanding, if you go back in time, ultimo, you go back to the beginning. And they went back to a beginning, pero so long ago, it's not just millions of years ago, but thousands of millions of years ago, billions of years ago. And they go back to a moment where they think everything happened, which is 13.6 billion years. Are you familiar with the James Webb Telescope? Have you heard of the Hubble telescope? Okay. Well, last Christmas Day, they launched another telescope, which is 1,000 times better than the Hubble telescope. And this Hubble telescope can go back over 13 billion years to see things. So the light that was there is still present to us. We can actually see it with our eyes. So they went back to the beginning, 13.4 billion years ago. Anong nakita nila doon? Nothing. But nothing wasn't empty. It was full of energy, and this energy came flaring forth in what came to be known as the Big Bang. But my professor says that's not a bang is a kind of an explosion. I prefer, he said, to call it the primordial flaring forth. And so what you had was a fireball with massive trillions of degrees of heat. And all there were energy and subatomic particles, no atoms. You know the structure of the atom, there's a nucleus and an electron and a neutron. Voila, if they tried to form, they would have been torn apart. Pero, unti-unti, the fireball cooled and the particles began to form atoms, simple atoms muna, hydrogen and helium, and maybe a little bit of lithium, no? And a new thing happened. Gravity was born. Things began to fall into each other, and things began to cluster with each other. And eventually stars, first generation stars, began to form. And these stars then were in galaxies. And here is a picture of the heavens. This is from the Hubble telescope, actually. They picked a place in the sky na mukhang wala, mukhang empty, and they kept probing and probing and probing, and they came up with this picture. These are not stars. These are galaxies and clusters of galaxies. Alam ba ninyo, what galaxy do we belong to? If I wanted to write you a letter, what galaxy would I send it to? Milky Way, tama. Who said that? Very good. Yeah, we belong to a galaxy called the Milky Way. Do you know the number of stars in the Milky Way? It's between 100 and 200 billion. That's 100 million? What? No, 100,000 million. And between that and 200,000 million. Dami, no? But that's only one galaxy. Do you know how many galaxies there are in the universe? When I started telling this story, they used to say 100 billion din. But now our instruments have improved, and we've discovered there's more. There could be actually up to 1 trillion. So here we are with the story of creation, from the scientific point of view, and we've gone from nothing to 1 trillion galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. Anong reaction natin dyan? Anong wastong reaction natin dyan? Hindi ba kahanga-hanga? Kahanga-hanga ang ginawa ng ating Diyos, no? And so the universe formed, and God created the heavens. And this is our understanding of the heavens sa kaslukuyang panahon, no? And then there were different kinds of stars, and the early stars were simple, hydrogen, helium. But then as stars began to develop, they developed a kind of a life cycle. So some stars, there was a special star called a supernova. This star was just the right size, but it would burn itself out, then it would collapse in on itself, and then explode with the brightness of 1 million stars. And in that process, new stars were born with new elements. I only mentioned 3 elements at the start. Pero yung elements that there are other elements that we are familiar with, like oxygen, iron, all the other table of elements were created. Yeah, but were created in this supernova. And somewhere in the Milky Way, 5 billion years ago, a star went supernova and became a cloud of dust. And this dust began to form new stars. And one of those stars was our sun. God created the sun to rule the day. Pero this was a 2nd or maybe 3rd generation star, and it had all the elements with it. And all those elements were swirling around this sun, and planets began to form. And we know the planets that formed around our sun. Now, one of the great things that is told, that this story reveals, is who we are. Like, we might look up at the sky and say, oh, that's a star. But actually, we were once part of a star. We were once part of the sun. So, and the sun was dust, stardust. So actually, we are all made from stardust. And, you know, children are not taught that in our educational system. We need to be taught that. I remember telling this story one time, and I noticed there was this lady, and she was a bit upset. So at the break, I went to her and I says, oh, kumusta ka na? Are you okay with the story? And she says, Father, I want to tell you something. She says, I have never told this to anybody in my life. She says, you know, when I was, would you like to unmute your microphone to speak? No. Yeah. I've never told this to anybody in my life, she said. When I was a child, I was given away by my parents. And I lived with my aunt, who had no children, in the province. And she said, I was so unhappy. But the good thing there was, at night, I could see the stars. They were so brilliant. And She said, I used to spend hours staring at the sky. Tapos sabi niya, I made up a story for myself that I had come from a star. And this was of great comfort to me as a child. Pero akala ko fantasy lang yan, she said. And now you're telling me that it's true. So we need to, part of your exercise, and bumabati ako sa PMPI for being so comprehensive in this summer camp, or this part of the questions that you're dealing with is, sino ka? Just remember, you are stardust, no? Don't ever forget that, no? So I'd like to do an exercise with you now. Feel your finger. Anong element na yan? Bagsak tayo ba sa physics? What are our bones made from? Calcium. Now, there isn't enough energy on Earth to make calcium. So that calcium came from somewhere else. It came from the supernova. So just another reminder that we are stardust, no? So God made the sun to rule the day, and the earth. Actually, I don't see the moon. There should be the moon here, should be here somewhere. Nawala. The story of the moon is this. The moon, a meteor hit the earth and sent up dust around our planet, and this became our moon. No. But anyway, God created the earth, and the earth is a very particular planet. Right size, right temperature, and it also had a very important thing. It had water. So and this was the conditions for the next breakthrough in creation, the birth of life. And God said, oh, there's the moon. God said, let there be life. Now, the first life was a very simple cell. It had a membrane. It could absorb elements, and it could expel elements, and it could reproduce. Now, it couldn't, wala pang sex. The early cell was called a prokaryote, and the prokaryote could only reproduce itself by cloning. And it was a very slow process. Pero kahit na napakaliit at mukhang hindi masyadong mahalaga yung prokaryote cell, what it did was it transformed the face of the earth. It absorbed elements, and then it released oxygen into the world. And first it went to the sa mga rocks. It oxidized the rocks, and it oxidized everything, and then it began to build up in the atmosphere. free oxygen. Kaya yung himpapawid natin ay hindi hulog ng langit. It's part of a process and malaking ang utang na loob natin sa prokaryote. And it set up a system and the oxygen went to, we have 24% or 21%, I think, free oxygen in our atmosphere. And this is something we take for granted. I want you to just become conscious of your breathing. Breathe in, hold your breath, and breathe out. We do that all the time. Pero all of life does that as well. And kasali dito yung mga halaman. Yung mga halaman are releasing oxygen into the air. And we are absorbing that oxygen when we breathe. And we are breathing out carbon dioxide, which the plants absorb, and it helps their growth. So what I'm saying here is we don't realize, we don't acknowledge how interconnected we are with the stars and with all of life as well. Pero sa kwento nito, naging problema yung oxygen. The oxygen began to attack the prokaryotes, and it wiped them out. Almost 90% of the prokaryotes were wiped out. At mukhang natatapos na yung kwento dyan, the story of life. Pero there was a breakthrough. And the breakthrough was this, that prokaryotes had learned there were some prokaryotes that had learned to absorb oxygen. And they united with other prokaryotes to form a new type of cell called eukaryotic cell. Look at your hand again, at the skin in your hand. If you had a microscope, you would go and you would see actually the cells in your hand. And they are eukaryotic cells. So something to be aware of, yung pinanggalingan natin. We are, and every form of life that you see now is made up of eukaryotic cells, no? And we know the story. We know the story of this, no? So after about a few billion years of prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, single cells lang, there was a big breakthrough where nagsama-sama yung mga cells and we get what we call multicellular life. And this takes different forms. The early form is the, oh my God, invertebrates. People walang gulugod. And so you get worms and jellyfish and things like that. And they begin to interact with one another and take in more and more information. And they need a central processing unit. And they begin to develop vertebrae. They begin to develop backbones and what are called vertebrates. And so the vertebrates come in, and these are the fish in the sea. And out of the vertebrates then, over a period of a few 100 million years, comes the reptiles. And the reptiles were dominant on Earth for 160 million years. Yung pinakamatingkad na mga reptiles were the dinosaurs. They were the dominant species or group of species for 160 million years. Tayo, we're the dominant species now. How long have we been around? Maximum, maybe 200,000 years. And, you know, we're Homo sapiens, but the Homo, whatever you call it, group, is around for about 10 million years, maybe. So the dinosaurs, siguro akala nila they would never disappear. Tulad natin, we're acting as if we can never disappear also. And all the evidence is kung tuloy ang pagkikilos natin, we will disappear in all probability, no? Pero the dinosaurs did disappear. In 65 million years ago, the planet was hit by a meteor, and they've discovered it's over in the Bay of Mexico, and the dinosaurs were wiped out as a species. But not all of them were wiped out. There were dinosaurs that could fly, and they're the birds. They survived, and chickens survived. So the dinosaurs are still around with us, but they're not the dominant anymore. When this catastrophe happened, there were little mga daga that were mammals. And mammals were different from reptiles. You can see the way they reproduce. Yung mga manok, they lay their eggs outside and they hatch their eggs outside. The mammals gestate sa loob ng mammals gestate sa loob ng sinupupunan ng nanay. And they are dependent on the nanay for food through the mammalian gland. So that's why they're called mammals. Now, mammals are very diverse. We have mammals in the sea, like whales. These are mammals. Whales and dolphins are mammals. But the mammals have all kinds of shapes and sizes: giraffes, elephants, dogs, and cats. And there was one group among the mammals that was very prominent, and it was the primates. These are yung mga unggoy type. And these were the ones that changes began to take place in this group about 10 million years ago. And out of this comes the human species. So we see changes taking place in the human, particularly in the size of the brain. We have Homo erectus, brain size 800 cc. Homo habilis, brain size 1,000. And then you come to the modern humans, Tayo, and you get the Neanderthals, brain size 1,700. Really an explosion. And then followed by us, brain size 1,350. Mas maliit ang ating brain kaysa sa mga Neanderthals, pero iba ang complexity ng brain natin. And this is the big breakthrough. Out of this, we lived for 100,000 years, over 100,000 years as animals. But then around 15,000 years ago, changes began to take place. And the story of human is the story of culture. For over 100,000 years, we were hunting-gathering, living very much like groups of chimpanzees. And then 12,000 years ago, climate stabilized, and we began to settle and plant and care for animals, raise animals. And we began to build villages and live in villages. We shared the planet with one other, or with a few other human species, like the Neanderthals, pero they became extinct. And they've discovered other humans also, modern humans, like the Denisovians, and some more as well. And there's probably more to be discovered. So who are we then? We began to settle in villages, plant and do animal husbandry. And we began to dominate the planet, even at this stage. And this was a very successful experiment. Who has grown up in a sitio or a barrio or a small town? Or are you all city people? But this was the most successful social experiment ever. In the year 1800, 90% of people on Earth still lived in Neolithic villages. Yung katangian ng Neolithic villages, face-to-face community. Parang kilala mo ang lahat. Kahit hindi sa pangalan, at least sa mukha. I grew up in a village like that, no? Pero by 1900, it was 90%. By 1900, it was about 40%, and by the year 2000, just over less than 50% of people lived in Neolithic villages. Yung malaking mga cities are taking over. So you have this ocean of Neolithic villages practicing farming and animal husbandry. And on top of this then came empires. And these empires were big in warfare, big in power, big in dominance, big in governance. And they also had their own wisdom traditions. And we get these empires then, the classical civilizations. We get the earliest that are still with us are the Hindu in India, and the classical in China, Taoism in China. And we get Buddhism coming out of Hinduism also. Then in Europe, you have Greek and Roman empires, and Egypt, of course, was an empire. And between Middle East and Egypt, there was a small empire, the Jewish empire, and they produced their own wisdom and their own religion also. So this was the situation in the world up to 1600, up to just 500 years ago or 400 years ago. If you had looked at the world in 1600, what you would have seen was an ocean of Neolithic villages with different empires dominating them. Some were advanced and some were problematic, no? The most advanced would have been Islamic at that time. But you would have noticed that Western civilization was beginning to expand. And it was, it came to the Philippines, and it went to the Americas and invaded the Americas, and became a new culture, a new civilization came out of that, which started about 400 years ago. And this is our modern civilization. It's based on technology. Iba ito. This became the first world civilization. and it had developed the powers of technology in a way that none of the others had had developed it. And actually, it had great promise. If you see that slide there, the promise is of a wonderland, a technological wonderland. And we all experience that, no, with our technology. It's very fascinating. But also it's very deceptive, because we also know that it is destroying. This civilization is hindi anda. It cannot, it is also developing, instead of a dream of a technological wonderland, it's developing, you know, a wasteland. So this is where we're at. This is our situation. We are told that we don't have, you know, it seems that in the next 10 years, the temperature is going to rise over 1.5 degrees. That means that on two fronts, we have to be careful: climate and biodiversity. If the temperature rises that much, then this was what could happen. The coral reefs will disappear. That's the nursery for all the life in the oceans. So forget about the life in the oceans. The ice caps will melt and the sea will rise 16 meters. 16 meters, that, you know. So places like Manila will be non-viable. Storms will be of unbelievable strength. Yolanda will only be so vast parts of the world will be uninhabitable. There will be tremendous displacement of people, causing political breakdown. The tundra, which is mostly in Siberia, contains massive amounts of methane gas, which is far worse than carbon dioxide. And this will be released into the atmosphere, and we could have runaway climate. So we could be looking at the end of the world. I don't want to be, as Pope Francis said, apocalyptic, no? But we have got to figure out our own culture. All of us were raised in this culture, and we need to make changes. And I was very happy with the outline, it's very comprehensive, and it's really gearing us to make a bold cultural revolution, as Pope Francis calls for. Pope Francis says that the problem is the technocratic paradigm, and we have got to come to grips with that. But this is where it's most difficult. You and I, you more than me, became human you were born into a technocratic civilization. All of us need to become fully human. We need a civilization. If we were born in 2,000 years ago in a Katutubong civilization, we'd be different. We'd be different people. We'd have different attitudes, but we were all born in the technocratic civilization. And some of the values of this, culture need to be questioned. One value is that the only important species in all of Earth is the two-legged species, tayo. And this is reflected in our legal systems, that we have human rights, and we struggle enough on that, but there are no animal rights, and there are no species rights, and there are no watershed rights and things like that. And this is why the RON is so important. And bumabati ako sa inyo that you're going to examine this, but it's not going to be easy, no? So, may pag-asa ba tayo? This is what Pope Francis talks about in Laudato Si about our civilization, the technocratic paradigm. And he says something very important here. He says, ecological culture, which he's proposing as yung kapalit's technocratic paradigm, cannot be reduced to a series of urgent and partial responses to the immediate problems of pollution, environmental decay, and the depletion of natural resources. There needs to be a distinctive way of looking at things, a way of thinking, policies, an educational program, a lifestyle, and a spirituality, which together generate resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. That's Laudato Si 111. So basically what he's saying, baka kilala nyo, I know some people who are very involved in recycling and, pero nakaka-turn. And they're they're focused on just one issue. Mahalaga yung issue na yan. But what Pope Francis is pointing out to us is that we need a pananaw. The technocratic pananaw hindi oobra yan, and we need to work for a new and what is that new paradigm? And I follow a passionist priest called Father Thomas Berry, and he says about our crisis, he looks at it from the point of view of the earth, and he says, Earth has gone through certain eras. Like when the dinosaurs disappeared, we had an era, which is millions of years. And the era of the mammals is called the Cenozoic. The era of there's the Paleozoic and other things like that. But they're millions of years but Thomas Berry says, we are at an earth moment. We are on a geological, on a planetary level, our crisis. And we need a new era. And he calls it the Ecozoic era. At ito ang pananaw for him. And I think Pope Francis goes along with this also. We need an Ecozoic era. And what will this era be? Thomas Berry says, the Ecozoic era is when humans learn to live in harmony with all of creation. And to do this, to get to this era, we need to do the great work. Ito ang panawagan sa kasalukuyang panahon natin. He says the great work is to carry out the transition from a period of human devastation of the planet to a period when humans would be present to the planet in a mutually enhancing manner. So that's filling up what Pope Francis says. He calls it ecological conversion. In the whole approach to ecological change, we can focus on morality, masama yan, Huwag nating gawin yan. Nakakahinaya yan, no? Better for us to focus on vision. And I know I'm addressing young people now, and you have a lifetime before you that your happiness and your meaningfulness of your life will depend, I think, on how you isa sa buhay nyo yung challenge to have a new vision, to change the vision of the technocratic. Kahit na mahal natin ang ating mga cellphones, ang ating technology, but to realize that we need a new vision. And I would encourage you to, to fall in love with trees and animals. My pets pa kayo. Cherish your pets. Cherish them because they are the gateway to the new vision, to the Ecozoic era. So, hanggang dito na lang po. What I'm presenting here is a story, but I'm also presenting a vision as a way of understanding what our problems are. And there's a guru of mine who said, if you want to understand anything, you have to understand everything first. And this story is the story of everything. So, maraming salamat po. Are you going to give them the questions? Could I add one question? I was just thinking this morning at the start. Bago ba ito sa inyo? Was this new for you? Yeah. Can I get rid of this?